Something happened this morning that every single person on this planet needs to understand, because it doesn't just affect oil prices or military strategy. It affects the price of your groceries, the cost of your gas, and whether the global economy tips into recession before summer. At 6:42 this morning, the United States military confirmed it had destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels operating near the Strait of Hormuz. Not drone boats, not patrol ships, mine-laying vessels, ships specifically designed to place explosive devices in the water that would detonate when tankers pass over them. And here is the part the headline version leaves out entirely. According to U.S. naval intelligence intercepts cited by readers this morning, Iran had already successfully laid an undisclosed number of mines in the strait before those ships were destroyed. The mines are still there. And as of this broadcast, no oil tanker, not a single one, has successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz in the last 6 days. Zero, from 37 tankers per day to zero in 11 days. I've been tracking every document, every filing, every intelligence report since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. The picture that emerges when you read the actual data, not the White House press releases, not the Pentagon briefings, is far more alarming than anything you've seen on the evening news. Let me show you exactly what's happening, why the administration's response has been riddled with false claims, and what this collapse of the world's most important shipping lane actually means for you, your money, and your food. Before we go deeper into the mine situation, the real state of U.S. naval capability in the Strait, and the economic numbers that should be dominating every headline right now. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. This story is moving faster than any I've covered. And the next 72 hours will determine whether this becomes a full-scale global energy catastrophe or whether diplomatic channels find a way to reopen the waterway. Hit subscribe. Notifications on. You'll want to be here when it breaks. The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile wide channel of water between Iran and Oman. It sounds small. It isn't. Every single day, approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil and liquefied natural gas pass through that strait. That number represents roughly 20% of the entire world's daily energy consumption, transported through a stretch of water narrow enough that you could theoretically see across it on a clear day. Saudi Arabia's oil goes through it. Iraq's oil goes through it. Kuwait's oil goes through it. The UAE's oil goes through it. Qatar's LNG, the natural gas that heats homes across Europe and Asia, goes through it. The Strait of Hormuz is not just important. It is, by any objective measure, the single most economically critical piece of ocean on the planet. Iran has known this for decades. Iranian military doctrine has long included what strategists call the Hormuz card. The ability to threaten or disrupt the strait is Iran's single most powerful economic weapon. Not its nuclear program, not its missile arsenal. The strait. And as of March 2nd, 2026, Iran played that card for the first time in history with full operational effect. February 28th, Operation Epic Fury begins. U.S. and Israeli forces launch coordinated strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, missile infrastructure, and military leadership. The Natanz nuclear facility is hit. Fordo is hit. Revolutionary Guard command centers are destroyed. The operation is the most significant military action in the Middle East since the 2003 Iraq invasion. March 1st, the first domino falls. The oil tanker Skylight is struck by a projectile north of the Strait of Hormuz while transiting toward the Gulf. The crew is unharmed. The ship is not. It becomes the first of 5 commercial vessels to be attacked in the opening days of the conflict, March 2nd. This is the moment everything changes. A senior IRGC official goes on Iranian state television and makes an announcement that sends shock waves through global energy markets. Quote, "The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Any vessel attempting to transit will be targeted." This is not a threat. It is a declaration. For the first time since the strait became the world's critical oil artery, Iran formally declared it closed to commercial shipping. Within 4 hours, maritime traffic has dropped 80%. Insurance companies begin refusing coverage for Gulf voyages entirely. March 3, supertankers, The enormous vessels that carry 2 million barrels of crude each begin abandoning planned Gulf voyages. According to Bloomberg Intelligence, at least 14 supertanker operators redirect their routes away from the Persian Gulf within a 24-hour window. The world's largest moving objects, ships that don't turn quickly under any circumstances, suddenly reverse course. March 5th, Reuters publishes the number that defines the crisis. Daily tanker transits through the Strait of Hormuz, 0. Not reduced, not limited, 0. Down from 37 on February 27th, the day before the operation began. The world's most important waterway has effectively stopped functioning. And here is the detail Fortune magazine captures in its analysis from that day. Iran achieved this not through a declared military blockade requiring a naval fleet. Iran achieved it through fear. 5 tankers struck. 16 mine-laying ships operating in the lane. Insurance companies walking away. That was enough. That is the setup. Now the documents. I pulled the CSIS analysis published 3 days ago. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, arguably the most respected defense think tank in Washington. Page 4, direct quote. Traffic estimates based on ship tracking data indicate that Iran has so far been largely successful in shutting down traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Critically, this includes Chinese-flagged vessels. No one, not even Beijing, is getting through. Read that again. Not even Beijing. China depends on Middle Eastern oil for 40% of its energy supply. China has a strategic partnership with Iran. China was reportedly briefed about this conflict before the public announcement, and even China cannot get its tankers through the strait right now. When the country with the most incentive and the most political cover to defy the blockade is staying away, that tells you everything about how dangerous those waters have become. But here is what got me. Page 7 of the same CSIS document. Quote, the U.S. Navy's current posture in the Gulf does not support sustained escort operations for commercial vessels. The combination of Iranian mine threat, missile capability, and drone swarm tactics creates a threat environment that would require dedicated mine sweeping operations, sustained aerial coverage, and significant surface vessel commitment before commercial transit becomes viable under escort protection. That's not my interpretation. That is CSIS. Put those together, the world's most important oil lane is shut down. Even Chinese tankers aren't going through. And the U.S. Navy, with 2 carrier strike groups in the region, has said in the assessment of the most respected defense analysts in Washington that it cannot currently escort commercial vessels safely. I went through this 3 times. The pattern is clear. Now, what nobody is covering. The oil price story is real. Yes, crude hit 142 a barrel before briefly spiking toward 120 before settling back near 110 this morning following Trump's statement that the war is very complete. Markets are volatile, not recovering. But the oil story is only half of what's happening at Hormuz. The half nobody is covering could actually be more devastating in the long run. Fertilizer, mere half of the world's era. The primary nitrogen fertilizer that grows the food you eat passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar is one of the world's largest producers of nitrogen-based fertilizers. The shipping lanes that move those fertilizers to the agricultural regions of South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Africa run directly through the strait. And right now, none of that fertilizer is moving. The Guardian published the data last Wednesday. Quote from Tobin Fraser, fertilizer market analyst at ICIS. The global fertilizer supply chain faces significant disruption if the effective closure of the strait persists. We are now 11 days into this closure. The planting season in South and Southeast Asia begins in 6 to 8 weeks. If fertilizer doesn't reach those markets in the next 3 weeks, crop yields for the 2026 season will fall significantly. 3 weeks, not 3 months. 3 weeks before the damage becomes irreversible for this year's global harvest. Wheat, corn, rice, the staple crops that feed billions of people. All of them facing a fertilizer supply shock because a 21-mile strait is shut down. The Independent put it plainly. Quote, the real threat from a Strait of Hormuz closure isn't an oil shortage. It's a global food crisis. The global food system has far thinner margins than the global oil system. That story got less attention than the 100-barrel headlines. It deserves significantly more. Read that again. Oil is recoverable. You can tap strategic reserves. You can reroute routes slowly. Food supply chain disruption from a missed planting season cannot be recovered in the same way. The farmers in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Nigeria who won't receive fertilizer this month will produce smaller harvests in October. Your grocery store will feel it in late 2026 and through 2027. Fallout already hitting globally. Iraqi oil production has collapsed 70% from 4.3 million barrels per day to 1.3 million. Iraq's storage facilities are full. Their remaining output is being rerouted to domestic refineries. Southern export terminals are set to halt entirely. The Iraqi government, which depends on oil revenue for 93% of its budget, is facing a financial crisis within weeks, all within 72 hours of the Reuters report. That fast. That's just the first layer of what's actually happening. There's more. Keep watching. Okay, but look, I have to be fair here. The other side has a point. Several points, actually. The Trump administration's defenders argue the economic disruption is temporary and that the strategic objective, eliminating Iran's nuclear program and military infrastructure, justifies short-term pain. They point to Operation Epic Fury's documented successes. Benotan's nuclear facility is destroyed. Fordo is destroyed. Iran's missile stockpiles have been substantially degraded. These are real military achievements with real long-term security value. Senator Tom Cotton put it directly this week. A few weeks of elevated oil prices is a small price to pay for permanently eliminating Iran's nuclear threat to Israel and American forces. You can disagree with that calculation, but it's not an irrational one. Second point, the administration argues that the Hormuz closure is not permanent and that Iran's ability to sustain it is limited. As Iran's own military infrastructure is degraded by continued Israeli strikes, the capacity to threaten or enforce a blockade diminishes. This is a reasonable argument. Iran's navy has already suffered significant losses. U.S. strikes on March 10th destroyed 16 mine-laying vessels specifically to degrade the blockade capability. Third point, and this is the one the media consistently underplays, the world has more strategic petroleum reserve capacity today than at any point in history. The United States alone holds approximately 370 million barrels in reserve. Saudi Arabia has significant additional capacity. If the closure remains temporary, measured in weeks, not months, the strategic reserve system may be able to absorb the shock without triggering a full recession. Jorn Lomberg, author and economist, argued on Thursday that the panic is disproportionate to the actual likely duration of the disruption, and that markets are pricing in worst-case scenarios rather than probable ones. Fairpoint markets routinely overshoot in crisis. Look, I'm not here to tell you who's right. If you read this situation as a catastrophic, avoidable economic disaster triggered by a war of choice, the evidence supports that interpretation. If you read it as a necessary short-term disruption to achieve long-term security objectives, the evidence supports that interpretation too. Both can be true. That's what makes this complicated. But here's what neither side is debating. Seriously enough, the mine situation. What I just described, Iran laying mines in the Strait this morning, is not something that goes away when the shooting stops. Mines are not withdrawn when ceasefires are signed. They have to be found and physically removed. The U.S. Navy's mined sweeping capability in the Persian Gulf has atrophied significantly over the past decade. The last dedicated U.S. mined sweeper fleet in the Gulf was downsized in 2019. Rebuilding that operational capability takes time. Even if Iran agreed today to cease all hostile action, reopening the Strait to commercial traffic would require weeks of mine clearing operations with significant risk. That is not a talking point. That is naval doctrine. What I can tell you, the documents, the ship tracking data, the Pentagon assessments, and the market data all paint the same picture. The world's most important waterway is functionally closed, and reopening it is harder than closing it. Here is when it started getting worse. This didn't come out of nowhere. Backstory quick. 4 months ago, classified intelligence assessments portions of which were later declassified and provided to selected congressional oversight members, indicated that Iran had prepositioned mines and fast attack boat squadrons in the southern Gulf in anticipation of potential U.S. military action. The intelligence community was warning about Hormuz contingencies before Operation Epic Fury was authorized months before. 6 weeks ago, Lloyd's of London, the world's leading maritime insurer, quietly raised war risk premiums for Gulf voyages by 300%. That is not a public announcement. That is an internal pricing adjustment that maritime operators worldwide immediately noticed. When Lloyd's moves that number, the people who actually move oil for a living pay attention, even when politicians aren't. 2 weeks ago, 3 of the 5 largest supertanker operators in the world, companies like Euronav, Frontline, and DHT, quietly canceled forward bookings for Gulf voyages scheduled for March and April. This happened before the war started. These companies had access to the same intelligence signals the markets were giving. They acted on it. Most coverage missed it entirely. Then Operation Epic Fury began, and what those operators anticipated in advance became operational reality within 72 hours. Pattern intelligence warning, insurance pricing, market positioning, then crisis. By the time the crisis is on television, the people who understood what was coming had already acted. You're watching the consequences they predicted. See where this is going. If this breakdown is useful so far, hit the like button. What I'm doing here is going through the actual ship tracking databases, the actual insurance filings, the actual CSIS documents that most broadcasts summarize in one sentence. Eurolike tells the algorithm this level of analysis matters and helps more people find this instead of just getting the headline version. March 10th, 2026. Here is exactly what happened in one day. And it is a day that reveals how badly the administration is struggling with the reality on water. At 7:23 in the morning, Energy Secretary Chris Wright posted on social media, and I'm going to quote this exactly because the words matter. U.S. Navy successfully escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. Oil is flowing. America wins, capital letters. No caveats, confidence. The post went viral immediately. Global energy markets moved. Brent crude dropped $4 per barrel within 15 minutes. Headlines appeared across major networks. U.S. Navy opens Hormuz corridor. For a brief moment, it appeared the crisis had a breakthrough. By 9:00 a.m., the post was deleted. By 10:15 a.m., the White House press secretary told reporters in a briefing, that is not true. The Navy has not escorted an oil tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. 4 words. Not true. By 10:45 a.m., CNBC confirmed directly with U.S. naval forces in the region. The statement was false. No escort had occurred. No tanker had transited. By noon, the Energy Department issued a statement blaming a staffer for the inaccurate post. Think about what just happened. The Energy Secretary of the United States posted false information about the most consequential economic question facing the global economy in years. The post moved oil markets. It was retracted by the White House directly. The secretary himself offered no personal apology, no explanation, no accountability. A staffer at a moment when every word from a U.S. official is being scrutinized by oil traders, shipping operators, and governments across 3 continents. The Energy Secretary posted false information about a tanker escort that never happened. And the answer was blame the staffer. That's not operational. That's not reassuring. That's not the confidence level you want from a team managing the most complex energy crisis in a generation. What everyone missed while that story was unfolding. Simultaneously, at approximately 6:00 a.m. Eastern, before the Wright post, before the deletion, before the White House correction, the U.S. Central Command released a brief statement confirming strikes on Iranian naval vessels. Quote, U.S. military forces eliminated multiple Iranian naval vessels, including 16 miners near the Strait of Hormuz. 16 mine layers destroyed. The timing tells the story. The U.S. military knew Iran was actively mining the strait. They destroyed the ships doing it, but the mines those ships had already deployed are still in the water. The Energy Secretary then falsely claimed a tanker had gotten through. The White House denied it, and the U.S. Navy, when asked directly whether It could now escort tankers said not yet. Escorts are not yet operationally possible. Here's where this gets consequential. The gap between the Trump administration's public messaging and the operational reality is not subtle. Trump says the war is very complete. Hegseth says Iran is badly losing. The president posts that oil price spikes are a small price to pay. Wright posts that a tanker got through. Every statement designed to project confidence and normally. And then the White House says that last part wasn't true. And the Navy says we can't escort tankers yet, and 0 tankers are transiting and mines are in the water. Don't go anywhere. What I show you next changes the economic picture entirely. Drop your prediction in the comments right now. Do you think the strait reopens within 30 days? See how accurate you are after the expert section. What are experts actually saying? Scott Modell, managing director of Rapidan Energy Group, testified before the Senate Energy Committee Tuesday. Direct quote, "This is by measurable oil market data, the biggest energy supply disruption since the Arab oil embargo of 1973. The 1973 embargo lasted 5 months and produced a recession. We are on day 11. If this continues for another 3 weeks, the economic mathematics become very difficult to escape, plain English. If this isn't fixed fast, recession becomes likely." Another one, Hale Croft, global head of commodity strategy at RBC Capital Markets, who has advised U.S. policymakers on energy security for 15 years. The mine disclosure is the piece of this story that changes the timeline completely. Without mine clearing operations, the question is not whether the U.S. can escort tankers. The question is whether any tanker captain on Earth is willing to sail into a minefield regardless of U.S. Navy presence. The answer is no. Key there, U.S. naval escorts solve the missile and drone threat. They don't solve the mine threat. These are fundamentally different problems requiring fundamentally different solutions. And one solution can be deployed quickly. The other requires specialized ships, specialized training, and weeks of patient, dangerous work. Here's what's interesting. Even analysts who strongly support Operation Epic Fury's strategic objectives are acknowledging the Hormuz situation is more complex than the administration has publicly stated. Amos Yadlin, former head of Israeli military intelligence. The mine deployment demonstrates that Iran still has meaningful retaliatory tools despite the degradation of its primary military assets. Hormuz is their endgame card. They are playing it carefully, not desperately. When someone who supports the military operation says the adversary is playing their card carefully, that's not a dismissal, that's a warning. Former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, speaking at a Peterson Institute event Thursday. Every model we run for sustained Hormuz closure beyond 3 weeks shows recession probability for the U.S. economy exceeding 65%. I want to be clear. I am not predicting that outcome. I'm describing what the data says. The window to prevent that outcome is closing. 65%, not speculation, not partisan framing. Economic modeling from a former Treasury Secretary who has run these scenarios in government. If this analysis is useful, hit like. These breakdowns take hours. The like button tells the platform this kind of analysis matters, takes 2 seconds. Helps a lot. Why should you care? Real talk. Your gas. Before Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th, Brent crude was trading at 87 per barrel. As of this morning, it's approximately 110, having briefly hit 120 yesterday before Trump's war is complete comment caused a brief pullback. That 26% increase in crude translates to roughly 60 to 70 cents per gallon at the pump within 2 to 3 weeks as the price works through the supply chain. If crude stays above 100 for the next 30 days, economists at Goldman Sachs project U.S. retail gas prices reaching $4.50 to $5 per gallon nationally. That matters to everyone who drives your groceries. This is the one nobody's connecting clearly enough. Fertilizer prices are up 28% in the last 11 days, according to commodity tracking data from Bloomberg. Spring planting season in the Northern Hemisphere begins in 4 to 6 weeks. American farmers, specifically corn and wheat farmers in the Midwest, depend on fertilizer inputs ordered in advance. Some of those orders are currently sitting in tankers outside the Persian Gulf, unable to move. Reuters reported this week that fertilizer plants in Qatar and Oman, plants that produce urea for export, have begun curtailing production because they cannot ship product. The International Food Policy Research Institute published an analysis 3 days ago stating a sustained Hormuz closure would push global food prices up an estimated 12 to 18% within 6 months. Your 400 is down 7.3% since February 28th. Energy sector up 14%. Airlines down 22%. Shipping companies up 31%. Manufacturing, consumer goods, agriculture, all down between 8 and 15%. If you hold a diversified retirement portfolio, you have already felt this. If the crisis persists, you will feel more of it. The broader math, the U.S. imports approximately 8% of its oil from the Gulf region. The bigger threat to the U.S. economy is not direct supply, but price. When 20% of global oil supply is disrupted, the price of 100% of global oil rises. Every barrel of American shale oil sold this week sells at 110 instead of 87. That's good for American oil companies. It's bad for everyone who buys anything that requires transportation, manufacturing, or agriculture. What nobody wants to say: the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is not a solution for a sustained Hormuz crisis. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve currently holds approximately 370 million barrels. The United States consumes approximately 20 million barrels per day. The math means the SPR covers about 18 days of total U.S. consumption at current rates. It is designed for supply disruptions, not for replacing the permanent loss of 20% of global supply. Using it aggressively now depletes the safety net that exists for a worse scenario. And right now, there is a worse scenario available. The mines that were laid today are not cleared. And if Iran lays more, the disruption extends beyond the current conflict into the post-conflict period. Practical steps. What informed people are doing right now: reviewing energy exposure and investment portfolios, asking financial advisors about the ratio of energy stocks to consumer stocks in their holdings, monitoring fertilizer commodity prices as an early indicator of food inflation, watching freight rates, which are a leading indicator of everything from what you pay for electronics to what you pay for produce. Questions to ask: does my retirement fund have significant airline or consumer discretionary exposure? Those sectors are getting hit hardest. Have I looked at energy sector allocation recently? It's the one sector actually benefiting from this. The broader picture. This crisis exposes a vulnerability that American policymakers have discussed in classified settings for 30 years, but never fully addressed. The Strait of Hormuz is a single point of failure for the global energy system. A single 21-mile choke point controls 20% of the world's energy. There is no alternative route. There is no bypass. The pipelines that exist primarily through Saudi Arabia carry only a fraction of normal hormones throughput. For the most sophisticated, heavily militarized nation in human history, we spent decades knowing this vulnerability existed and not building redundancy around it, because oil was cheap, because the threat seemed manageable, because building alternative infrastructure is expensive and unglamorous. And now the threat is no longer theoretical. How has the Trump administration and the operational reality have diverged visibly this week, and that divergence is itself a story. On March 9th, Trump posted on Truth Social, oil prices spiked a little. That's a small price to pay to finish off the evil terrorists of Iran once and for all. In the long run, oil supplies will be dramaticiously more obscure without the threat of Iranian ships, drones, missiles, and nuclear menace. Capital letters confidence. The framing this is temporary pain for permanent gain. On March 10th, Trump threatened Iran directly. If Iran does anything that stops the flow of oil within the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the United States of America 20 times harder than they have been hit before. Also, capital letters. Let me put those two statements together. On one day, Trump says 120 oil is a small price to pay. The next day, he threatens Iran 20 times harder if they stop oil flow. But oil flow has already stopped, has been stopped for 6 days. The strait that Trump says he will defend 20 times harder has been functionally closed since March 5th. Either the threat is directed at the mine situation, specifically preventing further military action to keep the closure permanent, or there is a gap between the messaging and the operational assessment. Secretary Heggs's response was more operationally specific, but created its own confusion. He held a briefing Tuesday describing the destruction of Iranian naval assets and calling Iran badly losing on day 10. The briefing was detailed, professional, and focused on the air campaign's successes. What was not addressed? The strait closure, the mine deployment, the zero tanker transits. A reporter asked directly, when will commercial shipping resume through Hormuz? Heggs' response, we are working on it. 3 words for the most consequential economic question facing the administration. Then the right incident, which I described earlier. A false claim posted by the Energy Secretary, deleted, denied by the White House, blamed on a staffer. Oil markets moved on a lie and then reversed. The administration's credibility on Hormuz is now a story within the story. And markets, which operate on information and trust, are pricing in not just the disruption, but the uncertainty about whether the administration understands the full scope of the problem. What's still unclear, 1, how many mines has Iran successfully deployed in the strait? The 16 mile-laying vessels destroyed this morning were caught before deploying their full payloads. But vessels deployed earlier in the crisis may have placed mines that were not intercepted. The exact mine density in the strait is unknown. The U.S. Navy is not publicly disclosing its assessment. 2, what is the mine clearing timeline? The U.S. Navy's dedicated mine countermeasures capability in the Gulf is limited. European allies, France, the UK, Germany have offered assistance. How quickly can a coordinated mine clearing operation be assembled and operational is the critical question. No public timeline has been provident. 3, what is Iran's remaining mining capacity? The 16 vessels destroyed this morning represent a significant portion of Iran's mining capability. But Iran has additional mine stocks and alternative delivery methods, including small boats and submarines. Whether destroying 16 ships ends the mine threat or reduces it temporarily is not publicly known. 4, at what point does sustained Hormuz closure trigger formal SPA allies? The International Energy Agency has a coordinated strategic reserve release mechanism. It has been used 3 times in history. The threshold has not yet been reached publicly, but private conversations among IEA member governments are reportedly active. Coming dates to watch. Tonight, March 11th, the U.S. Central Command will provide its next operational briefing expected around 1600 p.m. Eastern. The briefing will be watched specifically for any mention of mine clearing operations, tanker escort capability, and timeline to resuming commercial transit. Its SAT still says only we are working on it. That silence has meaning. Thursday, March 12th, the IEA Emergency Committee meets in Paris. The meeting will determine whether a coordinated strategic petroleum reserve release is warranted. If they vote yes, it signals that international consensus is that the closure is serious enough to require collective action. That vote itself will move markets. Friday, March 13th, the Lloyd's of London War Risk Committee holds its weekly review. Their pricing decision on Gulf War risk premiums will effectively determine whether any commercial operators begin attempting transit again, regardless of military situation. If Lloyd's lowers premiums, ships start moving. If they hold or raise, ships stay away. Lloyd's is the real gatekeeper right now. Saturday, March 14th. The first tankers currently anchored outside the Persian Gulf, some of which have been waiting since March 2nd, will reach the point where they must make a decision. Attempt transit, return to port, or wait longer. Ship operators have fuel and crew contract limits. The waiting game has a finite timeline. Watch Thursday. The IEA meeting is the next real inflection point. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. When the Central Command briefing happens tonight, I'll break it down. When the IEA meets Thursday, I'll cover it. When Lloyd's makes its call Friday, I'll have the analysis up within the hour. This story is the story of this moment, and it is moving in real time. Where we are right now, Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz closed on March 2nd. That declaration has been operationally effective. 0 tankers have transited in 6 days, down from 37 daily before the war. 5 commercial vessels have been struck since the conflict began. Iran laid mines in the Strait overnight before U.S. forces destroyed 16 Maine vessels this morning. An unknown number of mines may remain in the water. Oil prices peaked near 120 a barrel, currently trading near 110. Iraqi oil production has collapsed 70%. Fertilizer prices are up 28%, with global food security implications building in the background. The U.S. Energy Secretary posted a false claim that a Navy tanker escort had successfully transited. The post was deleted and denied by the White House within hours, with responsibility attributed to a staffer. The U.S. Navy has stated that tanker escorts are not yet operationally viable. Trump has threatened to hit Iran 20 times harder if the strait is not reopened. The White House simultaneously describes 120 oil as a small price to pay. Scheduled tonight, Central Command briefing. Thursday, IEA Emergency Committee. Friday, Lloyd's War Risk Review. Saturday, anchored tanker decision deadline. Not confirmed yet. Mine density in the Strait. U.S. mine clearing operational timeline. Whether IEA will trigger coordinated reserve release, whether any additional Iranian mining capacity remains operational. Here is what I know with certainty. The numbers are not ambiguous. 37 tankers per day to zero in 11 days. Oil racks production down 70%. Fertilizer prices up 28%. Mines in the water. No confirmed mine clearing timeline. A false statement from a cabinet secretary deleted within 2 hours. A Navy that says escorts are not yet possible. These are not partisan characterizations. These are the documented operational facts of the most consequential energy crisis in half a century. Whether this resolves quickly because Operation Epic Fury achieves its military objectives and diplomatic channels find a way to de-escalate the Strait situation. That is one possible outcome. Whether this extends into weeks of mine clearing operations and sustained economic disruption, that is another. The difference between those outcomes is not primarily military at this point. The mines are in the water. The Strait is effectively closed. The difference between those outcomes is diplomatic, intelligence-driven, and logistical. And right now, the administration is publicly projecting confidence while privately scrambling on all three fronts. Stay with this channel. Subscribe. Notifications on. When tonight's briefing happens, I'll be here. When the IEA meets Thursday, I'll have the analysis immediately. When Lloyd's makes its call, I'll break it down. Evidence first, analysis second. You decide what it means.